We're told that happiness is a destination. Achieve this milestone, buy that thing, reach this level of success, and finally, you'll feel complete. The promise echoes everywhere, in advertisements, in social media feeds, in the voices of those who claim they've figured it out. And so we chase. We accumulate experiences like trophies, relationships like possessions, achievements like badges of honor. We're trained to believe that the next pleasure, the next accomplishment, the next distraction will be the one that fills the void. But it never does. The moment we grasp what we wanted, the satisfaction dissolves like smoke, leaving us hungrier than before. But what if the entire pursuit is the problem? What if the very structure of desire itself guarantees our suffering? Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, spent his life examining this exact mechanism. He proposed something radical and deeply uncomfortable, that human existence is fundamentally driven by a blind, insatiable force he called the will, a relentless craving that can never be satisfied. According to Schopenhauer, pleasure isn't the opposite of pain. It's merely a temporary relief from wanting. The moment one desire is fulfilled, another emerges to take its place, creating an endless cycle of striving and dissatisfaction. Schopenhauer himself lived this insight. After achieving literary recognition in his later years, he didn't celebrate. He observed how quickly the satisfaction faded, replaced by new anxieties and wants. Those who studied his philosophy deeply reported something unexpected, not despair, but a strange liberation. They stopped chasing the illusion of permanent satisfaction and began to see through the mechanism that had controlled them. What they discovered wasn't happiness as the world defines it, but something more profound, a clarity about the nature of existence that freed them from the compulsive need to constantly pursue more. In this video, we'll explore Schopenhauer's radical diagnosis of human suffering and his path to transcending it. You'll discover why every pleasure you chase inevitably leads to emptiness, how desire itself is structured to keep you perpetually dissatisfied, and what Schopenhauer learned about breaking free from this relentless cycle. This isn't about finding more pleasure. It's about understanding the mechanism that makes pleasure itself a trap. If you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button and like this video to support our work. Thank you for your support. Now let's begin by examining the fundamental mechanism that Schopenhauer believed governs all human experience. Picture a man standing before a banquet table overflowing with every delicacy imaginable. He reaches for the first dish with genuine hunger, consuming it with satisfaction. But the moment he finishes, his eyes are already scanning for the next plate. He eats that too, then another and another. The hunger never truly disappears, it simply shifts its focus. What he thought was satisfaction was merely a brief pause between cravings. This is the human condition, according to Schopenhauer, and most people never realize they're trapped in this pattern. Schopenhauer recognized something that contradicted everything the Enlightenment thinkers of his era proclaimed. While his contemporaries celebrated human rationality and progress, he observed that beneath our logical minds lies something far more primal and irrational, a blind, striving force he called the will. This will doesn't care about your happiness or fulfillment. It cares only about perpetuating itself, driving you from one desire to the next in an endless cycle. You think you want the promotion, the relationship, the vacation, but what you're actually experiencing is the will using these objects as excuses to keep you in motion, forever reaching. Consider the person who spends years pursuing a relationship, convinced that finding the right partner will complete them. They finally meet someone, fall in love, experience the intoxication of new romance. For weeks or months, they feel genuinely fulfilled. But gradually, inevitably, the intensity fades. The relationship becomes familiar. New desires emerge, a better apartment, career advancement, exciting experiences to share. The partner who was supposed to be the answer becomes just another part of life's furniture. What happened? Nothing except that the will, having achieved one objective, immediately generated new ones to pursue, or examine the entrepreneur who builds their business from nothing, sacrificing everything for success. They tell themselves that reaching a certain revenue milestone will bring peace. They hit that number, and for a brief moment, there's satisfaction. Then almost immediately, the mind shifts. Now I need to double it. Now I need to expand. Now I need to prove I can do it again. The goalpost moves automatically without conscious decision. This isn't ambition in any noble sense. It's the will mechanically generating new objects of desire to maintain the cycle of striving. Schopenhauer understood that human nature is fundamentally restless. We're not built for contentment because the will that drives us is inherently insatiable. It's the same force that makes animals hunt, plants grow toward light, and rivers flow downward, a blind urge toward existence and propagation that has no ultimate purpose or endpoint. In humans, this manifests as desire stacked upon desire, each fulfilled want immediately replaced by a new lack. We experience this as our individual wants and goals, but we're actually just vehicles for an impersonal force that cares nothing for our well-being. In his clinical observations of human behavior, Schopenhauer noticed a pattern his contemporaries missed. People who achieved their desires weren't happier than those still pursuing them. They were simply temporarily relieved of one specific pain. The wealthy man suffers from boredom and existential emptiness. The poor man suffers from deprivation and struggle. Different forms, same fundamental suffering. The will ensures that satisfaction remains forever just out of reach, because satisfaction would mean the end of striving, and the will cannot tolerate stillness. Those who broke free from this cycle, even partially, shared a crucial characteristic. They stopped believing the lie that the next achievement, the next pleasure, the next experience would finally bring lasting fulfillment. They recognized the pattern. They saw how desire works, the anticipation, the brief satisfaction, the immediate emergence of new wanting. This recognition didn't make them passive or nihilistic. Instead, it freed them from the compulsive quality of their pursuits. They could engage with life without being enslaved by the constant promise of future satisfaction. But most people never reach this insight. They spend their entire lives in what Schopenhauer called the pendulum swing between suffering and boredom. When a desire is unfulfilled, they suffer from wanting. When it's satisfied, they suffer from the emptiness of having nothing to strive for. So they quickly generate new desires to escape the boredom, and the cycle continues. They mistake the brief relief from wanting as happiness, never realizing that what they call pleasure is simply the temporary cessation of pain. Schopenhauer saw through the entire mechanism with brutal clarity. Pleasure isn't a positive state, it's a negative one. It's the absence of suffering, the relief from wanting, the brief pause before the next craving emerges. True peace, true freedom, wouldn't come from fulfilling desires, but from understanding and transcending the will that generates them endlessly. This is where his philosophy becomes not just diagnostic, but potentially transformative, pointing toward a way of being that doesn't depend on the constant pursuit of satisfaction. If you've recognized yourself in this pattern, the endless cycle of wanting, getting, and wanting again, click the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for your support. This recognition is the first step toward what Schopenhauer considered the only genuine path to liberation. The question becomes unavoidable. If pleasure is a trap and desire guarantees suffering, what's the alternative? Schopenhauer didn't leave us with mere philosophy. He pointed toward specific practices and states of being that could offer relief from the tyranny of the will. But understanding these requires first grasping how radically different his solution is from everything our culture teaches us about happiness and fulfillment. Most people misunderstand what Schopenhauer proposed as liberation. They imagine he was advocating for a grim resignation, a joyless existence of deprivation and self-denial. But Schopenhauer wasn't asking you to simply stop pursuing pleasures while remaining tortured by desire. He was pointing to something far more profound, the possibility of temporarily suspending the will itself, achieving states where desire ceases to operate, where the relentless striving pauses, and genuine peace becomes possible. Schopenhauer called this state will-less perception, and he found it most accessibly in aesthetic experience, particularly in art and music. In these moments, the subject-object distinction dissolves. You're not viewing a painting as someone who wants something from it. You're not listening to music to achieve a goal. You become pure perception, witnessing without craving, experiencing without the constant mental commentary of, how can I use this? Or, what do I get from this? The will temporarily releases its grip, and for that duration, suffering ceases. Born into a wealthy merchant family in Danzig in 1788, Schopenhauer was groomed for commercial success. His father expected him to inherit the family business and continue the profitable trading enterprise. But young Arthur felt a profound disconnect from this path. The world of commerce, with its constant calculation and pursuit of advantage, struck him as fundamentally hollow. When his father died, possibly by suicide, Schopenhauer was freed from familial obligation, but also confronted with the darkness that would inform his entire philosophy. He made a decisive choice that shocked his family and social circle. He abandoned the secure, lucrative path laid before him and pursued philosophy instead. Not the optimistic, rational philosophy popular in German universities, but something far more radical. He immersed himself in the works of Kant and, crucially, in Eastern philosophical traditions, particularly Buddhism and Hindu Vedanta, which were just beginning to be translated into European languages. This synthesis would become the foundation of his revolutionary worldview. Schopenhauer spent years in relative isolation, developing his magnum opus, The World as Will and Representation. The work was published in 1818 to almost complete indifference. The academic establishment ignored it. Philosophers dismissed it. The public showed no interest. For decades, Schopenhauer lived in obscurity, his profound insights about human nature recognized by virtually no one. This period wasn't romantic or inspirational in any conventional sense. It was marked by bitterness, resentment, and the constant sting of being ignored. Yet this isolation proved essential. Removed from academic politics and public approval, Schopenhauer refined his ideas with uncompromising honesty. He didn't soften his conclusions to make them more palatable. He didn't adjust his philosophy to align with popular sentiment or Enlightenment optimism. He pursued truth as he perceived it, regardless of how dark or uncomfortable that truth might be. The years of being dismissed by others forced him to confront whether his insights held value independent of external validation. During this period, Schopenhauer engaged in what he considered the most important practice for understanding the will: systematic self-observation. He watched his own desires arise and dissipate. He noticed how quickly satisfaction turned to emptiness. He observed the mechanical quality of wanting, how one fulfilled desire was immediately replaced by another without conscious choice. This wasn't philosophical speculation, it was empirical investigation of his own psychological mechanisms. What emerged from this crucible wasn't hopeful or comforting. Schopenhauer confirmed his darkest suspicions: that human life is indeed characterized by suffering, that the will drives us relentlessly toward goals that provide no lasting satisfaction, that pleasure is merely the temporary absence of pain. But he also discovered something unexpected: that awareness of this mechanism, unflinching recognition of how desire operates, could itself provide a kind of liberation. Not escape from the will entirely, which he considered nearly impossible for most people, but moments of genuine peace. He identified specific practices that could temporarily suspend the will's operation. Aesthetic contemplation, where you lose yourself in art or nature without wanting anything from it. Philosophical reflection, where you observe the mechanism of desire from a detached perspective. And most radically, what he called denial of the will to live. Not suicide, which he strongly opposed, but a gradual reduction of attachment to desires, a practice remarkably similar to Buddhist renunciation. Schopenhauer recognized that these practices work not through adding something to your life, but through subtracting the constant striving that characterizes normal consciousness. The peace he described wasn't positive in the way pleasure is supposed to be positive. It was the profound relief of desire's temporary cessation. Like a man carrying a heavy burden who finally sets it down, the relief comes not from gaining something, but from being freed of a constant pressure. The philosopher's later years brought what the world calls success. His books were finally read, his ideas gained influence, philosophers began citing his work. But Schopenhauer himself remained profoundly ambivalent about this recognition. He noticed how quickly the satisfaction of being acknowledged faded. He observed how easily new desires emerged even in old age. The very success that was supposed to vindicate his years of obscurity confirmed his philosophy's central insight. Achievement provides no lasting peace. What Schopenhauer required from those who would follow his path was ruthless honesty about their own psychological mechanisms. Not the performance of understanding, but genuine observation of how desire operates in their own experience. Not intellectual agreement with his philosophy, but empirical verification through self-examination. He knew that most people would resist this investigation because it revealed uncomfortable truths about the nature of satisfaction and the futility of most pursuits. This brings us to the practical question: how does one actually implement Schopenhauer's insights? How do you move from understanding that desire is a trap to experiencing liberation from its compulsive quality? The answer isn't simple or comfortable, but it's remarkably specific in Schopenhauer's writings. What follows is the structured approach to what he called the denial of the will. To deny the will, as Schopenhauer understood it, isn't to sit passively and reject all desires intellectually. It's to systematically reduce your identification with wanting, to observe the mechanism of desire without being controlled by it, and to cultivate states where the relentless striving temporarily ceases. This requires a complete restructuring of how you relate to pleasure, achievement, and even your own thoughts. The following framework emerges directly from Schopenhauer's writings and the practices he considered essential. Schopenhauer insisted that denial of the will must be built on a foundation of genuine understanding, not mere belief. You can't simply decide to stop wanting and expect it to work. The process begins with systematic observation of your own desires as they arise, persist, and dissolve. This means creating deliberate periods where you do nothing but watch your mental movements, the emergence of wanting, the fantasy about satisfaction, the actual experience if you fulfill the desire, and the inevitable return to new wanting. The structure he outlined, though never formalized into explicit steps, contains 4 essential elements that work together to weaken the will's grip on consciousness. First pillar, aesthetic contemplation. Schopenhauer believed that engagement with art, particularly music, offered the most accessible entry point into will-less perception. The practice is specific. Regularly expose yourself to art or natural beauty with the explicit intention of observing without wanting. Stand before a painting not to appreciate it, post about it, or gain cultural capital from having seen it, but to lose yourself in pure perception. Listen to music without using it as background for other activities, without analyzing it, without wanting it to make you feel a certain way. In these moments, when successful, the constant mental commentary of desire stops. You're not the subject wanting something from an object, you become pure awareness witnessing form. This state, while temporary, demonstrates that liberation from the will is experientially possible. Second pillar, systematic reduction of indulgence. Here, Schopenhauer parts ways completely with modern notions of treating yourself or self-care through pleasure. He observed that every indulged desire strengthens the will's hold on you. When you satisfy a craving, you reinforce the neural pathway that generates that type of wanting. The practice isn't ascetic suffering for its own sake, but deliberate refusal of unnecessary pleasures to weaken desire's compulsive quality. This means identifying your habitual indulgences, the comfort foods, the mindless entertainments, the small luxuries you've convinced yourself you need, and systematically eliminating them. Not to punish yourself, but to observe what happens when you don't automatically satisfy every want. You discover that most desires, when not indulged, simply dissolve. The urgent craving for dessert, when unfulfilled, disappears within hours. The supposed need for a new purchase, when resisted, reveals itself as arbitrary. This isn't deprivation, it's empirical investigation of how desire actually operates. Third pillar, contemplative solitude. Schopenhauer spent much of his life in deliberate isolation, and he considered this essential for anyone serious about understanding the will. The practice requires regular periods of complete solitude, not the pseudo-solitude of being alone while scrolling through social media, but genuine withdrawal from all external stimulation and social interaction. During these periods, you face the raw machinery of your own consciousness without distraction. You observe how quickly boredom arises when there's nothing to pursue. You notice the mind's constant generation of projects, plans, desires, anxieties. You watch thoughts arise and dissolve without acting on them. This isn't meditation in the peaceful sense. It's often uncomfortable, even disturbing, but it reveals the will's relentless operation in a way that no amount of reading philosophy can accomplish. Fourth pillar, philosophical reflection on suffering. Schopenhauer advocated for deliberate contemplation of suffering, not your own pain necessarily, but the universal nature of suffering inherent in existence. The practice involves studying the lives of others, observing nature's cruelty, contemplating the inevitable decline of all things, and recognizing that suffering isn't aberrant but structural to life driven by the will. This sounds morbid, but Schopenhauer's point was that most people avoid confronting suffering until it forces itself upon them. By deliberately reflecting on pain and impermanence, you reduce the shock when suffering inevitably appears in your own life. More importantly, you begin to recognize that pursuing pleasure is fundamentally trying to run from suffering rather than addressing its source. When you clearly see that all striving leads ultimately to dissatisfaction, the compulsive quality of desire naturally weakens. These 4 elements work together to create what Schopenhauer called the better consciousness, a state where you still engage with life and fulfill necessary desires, but without the desperate, compulsive quality that characterizes most human activity. You eat when hungry, but without the constant mental anticipation of pleasure from food. You work, but without the fantasy that achievement will bring lasting satisfaction. You relate to others, but without the possessive neediness that characterizes most relationships. Schopenhauer's own life demonstrated this possibility. In his later years, even as recognition came, he maintained his disciplined routine. Rising early, writing in the morning, walking in the afternoon with his poodle, dining at the same restaurant at the same table. He engaged with life's pleasures, good food, conversation, music, but without attachment to them. His satisfaction wasn't dependent on their continuation. His peace wasn't disturbed by their absence. This is the practical result of denying the will, not the elimination of all pleasure or activity, but the end of their compulsive power over you. But implementing these practices reveals something that no philosophical text can fully prepare you for: the depth of resistance you'll encounter not from external circumstances, but from your own mind. This is where Schopenhauer's philosophy moves from intellectual understanding to lived confrontation with the will's power. When you begin to seriously withdraw from the constant pursuit of satisfaction, something happens that most people aren't prepared for. The noise of desire, which has been drowning out everything else your entire life, begins to quiet. And in that silence, you encounter what Schopenhauer recognized as the fundamental truth beneath all human activity: a vast, purposeless emptiness that we've been running from since birth. The true test of Schopenhauer's path isn't intellectual. It's this moment when you stop filling your consciousness with pursuits, pleasures, and distractions, and face what's actually there when nothing is there. Most people experience this as a kind of existential terror. Without the constant movement toward goals, without the anticipation of future satisfactions, without the familiar cycle of wanting and getting, consciousness feels unbearably empty. The mind desperately wants to generate new desires, new projects, new distractions. It suggests that surely this emptiness means you're doing something wrong, that you need to return to normal pursuit of pleasure and achievement. This is where most people abandon the path. The discomfort of facing emptiness feels worse than the suffering caused by endless desire. At least chasing pleasures gives you something to do, some sense of direction and purpose, even if it never delivers lasting satisfaction. The emptiness Schopenhauer points you towards seems like depression, like something has gone terribly wrong. Your mind tells you that surely the solution is more engagement, more pleasure, more achievement, anything except sitting with this uncomfortable void. But what your mind is experiencing as wrong is actually right. Schopenhauer recognized that this confrontation with emptiness is precisely where transformation becomes possible. The void you're encountering isn't a problem to be solved. It's the truth that's been there all along, temporarily revealed by the absence of distraction. The will has been operating like a hyperactive narrative engine, constantly generating stories about what you need, what you must have, what will finally make you complete. When you stop feeding that engine, it sputters and reveals the emptiness beneath the constant storytelling. Those who push through this phase, and Schopenhauer was clear that most don't, report something unexpected. The emptiness gradually transforms from something terrifying into something liberating. It's not that it becomes pleasant in any conventional sense. It remains empty. But the desperate need to fill it, to escape it, begins to dissolve. You start to recognize that the emptiness was never the problem. The problem was your relationship to it, the constant flight from facing what is when nothing is being pursued or achieved. Schopenhauer wrote extensively about what he called the vanity of existence, the recognition that all human striving is fundamentally purposeless, that the will has no ultimate goal, that we're essentially mechanisms designed to perpetuate existence without any reason for doing so. This sounds nihilistic, and many interpret it that way. But for those who genuinely confront it, rather than merely thinking about it intellectually, this recognition brings profound relief. If existence is inherently purposeless, then you're free from the tyranny of needing to find or create purpose. If the will's striving has no ultimate justification, then you can stop seeking justification for your own peace. In the silence created by withdrawing from constant pursuit, insights begin to emerge that can't come through any other means. You notice how much of your identity has been constructed around your desires, the person who wants this career, who needs that relationship, who must achieve these goals. When desire quiets, that identity becomes transparent. You see it as a construction rather than a truth, and something in you recognizes that you're not identical to the wanting machine you've believed yourself to be. The discomfort serves a specific function that Schopenhauer understood deeply. It burns away the illusions that have kept you enslaved to the cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. Every time the mind suggests that returning to normal pursuit of pleasure would be better than this confrontation with emptiness, and you resist that suggestion, the will's grip weakens slightly. Every time you feel the desperate urge to fill the void with some new project or pleasure, and you simply observe that urge without acting on it, you're learning that you're not obligated to obey every impulse that arises. This process isn't linear or dramatic. It's more like the slow erosion of a deeply carved channel. For years, all your mental energy has flowed in the direction of, what do I want next? And how do I get it? Changing this pattern requires thousands of small moments where you redirect that flow, where you catch yourself generating new desires and simply stop, where you notice the impulse to pursue pleasure and choose not to. Each instance seems insignificant, but cumulatively they reshape the landscape of consciousness. What emerges from this confrontation, for those who stay with it long enough, isn't happiness as the world defines it. Schopenhauer never promised happiness. He considered that concept fundamentally misguided. What emerges is something stranger and more valuable, a kind of peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a stillness that isn't disturbed by the presence or absence of pleasure, a freedom from the compulsive quality of wanting that has driven you since you first became conscious. You begin to recognize suffering when it appears, not as a problem to be immediately solved, but as the inevitable companion of existence driven by will. You see pleasure for what it is, temporary relief from wanting, not positive satisfaction. And crucially, you stop organizing your entire life around the pursuit of one and the avoidance of the other. This doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent to pain. It means you stop believing the fundamental lie that if you just pursue the right pleasures and avoid the right pains, you'll finally be satisfied. The mind that has genuinely confronted this emptiness and survived it intact becomes fundamentally different from the mind that remains in constant flight from it. Not better in any moral sense. Schopenhauer wasn't making ethical claims, but different in its relationship to desire, to suffering, to the entire machinery of consciousness. And this difference, while impossible to fully capture in words, represents what Schopenhauer considered the only genuine liberation available to human beings. The change doesn't announce itself with trumpets. There's no moment where you suddenly feel enlightened or permanently free from the will's influence. Instead, there's a gradual recognition that the quality of your consciousness has shifted in ways that would have been impossible to imagine when you were still fully identified with the cycle of desire and satisfaction. You notice it first in small things. The craving for your habitual indulgence arises, and instead of the usual compulsive quality, there's a gap, a space where you can observe the desire without being immediately pulled into satisfying it. The impulse is still there, but it's no longer experienced as a command that must be obeyed. It's just a mental event, arising and eventually dissolving like a cloud passing through an empty sky. Then you begin appearing differently to others, and here's where the irony becomes almost comical. The people in your life notice the change, but they can't quite articulate what's different. You seem calmer, but it's not the calm of someone who's achieved all their goals. It's something stranger. You engage with life's activities, but without the desperate edge that characterizes most people's pursuits. You're present in conversations without the constant calculation of what can I get from this person, or how am I being perceived. You participate in social rituals without either cynical detachment or desperate need for acceptance. What disturbs people most is that you don't seem to want anything from them. Not in a cold or aloof way, but you've genuinely stopped operating from the place of lack that drives most human interaction. This makes you harder to manipulate, harder to control through the usual social mechanisms of approval and rejection. People who are still fully identified with their desires often find this unsettling because they can't figure out what lever to pull to get you to react in predictable ways. Friends and family might interpret this as depression or emotional flatness, especially at first. They're accustomed to seeing you excited about future plans, anxious about outcomes, desperately pursuing pleasures or achievements. When that pattern quiets, they worry something is wrong. The truth is more complex. What they're perceiving as lack of emotion is actually the absence of the emotional turbulence created by constant wanting and fearing. The authentic emotions, compassion, genuine interest, natural joy, and beauty remain and may even become clearer without the noise of compulsive desire. The world doesn't celebrate this transformation because it's not useful to the structures that depend on your desire. Consumer culture needs you to believe that the next purchase will satisfy you. Career culture needs you to believe that the next promotion will bring fulfillment. Social media needs you to believe that the next post, like, or follower will fill the void. Someone who has genuinely weakened the will's grip on their consciousness is essentially immune to these mechanisms of control. They can engage with them if necessary, but without the desperate need that makes manipulation possible. Schopenhauer observed that genuine transformation always appears anticlimactic to those still caught in the cycle of desire. They expect enlightenment to look like perpetual bliss, constant enthusiasm, superhuman achievement. What it actually looks like is ordinary, someone going about their daily life without the constant mental commentary of, is this enough? And what do I need next? The extraordinary thing is precisely how unremarkable it appears from the outside. What has actually changed is your relationship to suffering. When pain arises, and Schopenhauer was clear that it continues to arise because you're still a living organism subject to the will, you no longer add the secondary layer of this shouldn't be happening, or I must escape this immediately. You recognize suffering as the natural state of existence driven by will, encounter it when it appears, and don't build elaborate fantasies about how to permanently avoid it. This doesn't make pain pleasant, but it removes the psychological anguish that typically accompanies physical or emotional discomfort. Similarly, when pleasure appears, you can enjoy it without the grasping that normally accompanies pleasurable experiences. The good meal is appreciated, but you're not already planning the next good meal while eating it. The beautiful sunset is witnessed, but you're not trying to capture it, post it, or use it to create an identity as someone who appreciates beautiful sunsets. The pleasure exists, you experience it, and then it passes without the desperate attempt to hold on to it or recreate it. You become genuinely indifferent to outcomes in a way that paradoxically often leads to better results. Because you're not desperately attached to specific outcomes, you can act with more clarity and effectiveness. The anxiety that paralyzes decision-making, the constant calculation of "what if I choose wrong?" dissolves when you're not convinced that any particular outcome will bring lasting satisfaction or permanent disaster. You make decisions, observe their consequences, and adjust without the emotional drama that typically accompanies success or failure. People notice that you've stopped performing. The social game of presenting a carefully curated image, the constant subtle communication of status and achievement, the anxious monitoring of how you're being perceived, all of this quiets when you're no longer driven by the need for external validation. Not because you've become arrogant or antisocial, but because the desperate hunger for approval has been revealed as just another expression of the will, just another form of wanting that can never be satisfied. The transformation extends to how you relate to time. Most people live in constant anticipation, the next weekend, the next vacation, the next major life event that will supposedly bring satisfaction, or they're trapped in nostalgia for past moments when they felt satisfied. When you've genuinely understood that satisfaction never lasts, that the next thing won't deliver what the mind promises, the present moment becomes the only thing that's real. Not in some mystical sense, but simply because the fantasy of future fulfillment and the memory of past satisfaction lose their compulsive power. This doesn't mean you stop planning or remembering. It means you stop using plans and memories as escapes from the present reality of existence. You engage with what's actually here, the current task, the current conversation, the current experience, without the constant mental comparison to what could be or what was. This is what Schopenhauer meant by will-less perception becoming more frequent and natural. The gap between desires widens, and in those gaps, genuine presence becomes possible. What you discover, much to your surprise, is that this state, which would have seemed unbearably boring or depressing when you were still fully identified with desire, contains its own quality of satisfaction that doesn't depend on getting what you want. It's not the satisfaction of achievement or pleasure, it's the deeper peace of no longer being at war with the fundamental nature of existence. You stop demanding that life be other than it is. You stop requiring that the next moment bring something better than this moment. And paradoxically, this acceptance transforms your experience more profoundly than any amount of achieving desires ever could. What Schopenhauer called the denial of the will isn't actually denial in the sense of pushing something away. It's more accurate to call it seeing through, recognizing desire for what it is and ceasing to be controlled by it. This seeing through requires a particular kind of courage that has nothing to do with the heroic narratives our culture celebrates. It's the courage to face emptiness and discover it's not actually empty. The courage to stop running and realize there's nothing chasing you except your own mind. The process is alchemical in the true sense, a transformation of base material into something fundamentally different. Your desires don't disappear entirely. Your organism still requires food, shelter, basic comforts. But the quality of wanting changes completely. What was once a desperate grasping becomes a simple recognition of need. What was once an anxious striving becomes effortless action. You still participate in life, but you're no longer enslaved by participation. Schopenhauer understood something that most philosophical traditions miss. Liberation isn't found by adding more to your life, more knowledge, more experiences, more achievements, more pleasures. It's found by subtracting the compulsive quality of wanting that has been driving your every action since birth. Every desire you observe without immediately satisfying weakens the will's grip. Every moment you spend in aesthetic contemplation, losing yourself in art or nature, demonstrates that consciousness can exist without the constant pressure of needing something. True freedom, as Schopenhauer conceived it, isn't the freedom to get whatever you want. That's just slavery to desire with better resources. True freedom is freedom from the tyranny of wanting itself. It's the recognition that your peace doesn't depend on circumstances aligning with your preferences. It's the understanding that the will continue generating desires until you die, and you don't have to obey every impulse it produces. The person who has genuinely integrated this understanding becomes almost invisible in a certain sense. They don't stand out as particularly successful or particularly failed by conventional measures. They're not trying to prove anything or achieve recognition. They engage with their work, their relationships, their daily activities without the performance quality that characterizes most human behavior. What makes them fundamentally different is internal, a stillness that isn't disturbed by the presence or absence of what the world calls success. This state brings with it a particular kind of compassion that Schopenhauer considered one of the marks of genuine transformation. When you've seen through the mechanism of desire in yourself, you recognize it operating in everyone around you. You see people frantically chasing satisfactions that you know won't satisfy them, and instead of judgment, there's understanding. You remember being caught in that same cycle. You recognize the suffering inherent in being driven by the will, and this recognition naturally generates compassion for all beings subject to that same force. The irony Schopenhauer appreciated is that those who stop chasing happiness often find something deeper than happiness, a contentment that doesn't depend on circumstances. It's not the contentment of having gotten what you wanted, it's the contentment of no longer needing to get anything. You discover that the void you were running from your entire life was never actually threatening. It was just the absence of desire, and that absence, once you stop fearing it, contains a quality of peace that no amount of satisfied desires could provide. Your presence in the world becomes different, not better in any moral sense, but more authentic. You stop pretending to want things you don't actually want. You stop performing enthusiasm for achievements that don't genuinely move you. You stop participating in the collective delusion that the next thing will finally bring satisfaction. This authenticity isn't strategic. It's not an attempt to stand out or be different. It's simply what remains when you stop pretending that desire will someday deliver what it promises. This is how Schopenhauer himself lived in his later years. Engaged with the world when necessary, withdrawn when possible, working on his philosophy not because he believed it would change the world or bring him satisfaction, but because that's what his particular organism was suited to do. Enjoying pleasures when they appeared, but not devastated by their absence. Observing the human comedy with a mixture of compassion and detached amusement. Free, in the only way he considered freedom possible. Not from circumstance, but from the compulsive quality of wanting. The path he outlined isn't for everyone, and Schopenhauer knew this. Most people will continue the cycle of desire and dissatisfaction until death, and he saw no point in pretending otherwise. But for those who have genuinely exhausted the promises of pleasure, who have achieved everything they thought would satisfy them and found it wanting, who are ready to face the uncomfortable truth about desire's nature, for them, this path offers something more valuable than happiness. It offers liberation from the need for happiness, and that liberation, paradoxically, contains its own profound and lasting peace. What pleasure have you been chasing that, if you're honest with yourself, has never brought the lasting satisfaction it promised? What would happen if you stopped believing that the next achievement, the next relationship, the next experience would finally fill the void that remains no matter what you acquire? Can you observe your own desires arising and dissolving without immediately acting on them, and in that observation, discover a freedom you've never accessed through pursuing what you want? Schopenhauer would say that these questions aren't meant to be answered quickly or comfortably. He believed that genuine liberation requires confronting the fundamental purposelessness of desire, recognizing that the will operates mechanically without concern for your happiness, and learning to observe this process without being enslaved by it. The path he outlined isn't about achieving more. It's about understanding that achievement itself is part of the trap, and true peace comes from ceasing to need what you've been conditioned to want. If this video challenged your assumptions about pleasure and satisfaction, or revealed patterns of desire you hadn't fully recognized, leave your like and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring the human mind through the radical insights of Arthur Schopenhauer. Until the next video.